okay, I did promise we'd try to maybe finish. Did I say maybe? And I said, we're going to finish lesson 9. And I wanted to, or is it 10 rather? It's lesson 10. And I did want to make sure that we just spend a little time with the top of page 59. I just think these are some practical things that are worthy of just looking at in class a little bit and seeing if we want to elaborate on anything here. We can read these. I hope we already have read these. Bearing with one another is, I'm patient when my brother rubs me the wrong way. I suffer long rather than shoot from the hip. I think we know what that analogy looks like. I do nothing to agitate or blow something out of proportion. My wife liked to talk about our house of being a place where there's not going to be any drama, and didn't like drama when the kids had drama. And it's a temptation to feel a little self-important sometimes and to over-exaggerate the situation. I respect his opinions and value his input, even when I disagree. I think that's a very important element, is the respect is there, whether or not you are happy with where you stand on at the conclusion of a conversation. Because I think that is kind of goes back to a verse we didn't read earlier, Ephesians 4:26 and 27, about not giving the devil a place to plant his foot. Don't give the devil a foothold. Don't be angry. Be angry and sin not. And so some of these things that, I mean, if you blow up, you get out of proportion, you start to hold a feeling towards someone that you disagree with. These are all opportunities in and of themselves, if this was an isolated incident, such as making sure you still respect someone even when you disagreed with them. That's an isolated incident. It probably doesn't go anywhere. But if it becomes habitual or becomes the norm, the common outcome of when I and someone else have any kind of conversation, and I'll tell you too, it points to something else. If I find that I'm aggravated at Andrew because we disagreed over something, and Chuck's got me a little aggravated because we disagreed, and Samantha's been poking at me and we disagree, and Aaron said something and and then I'm starting to get agitated with all these people. The problem's me. It's not them. If there's a common root there's a commonality. The problem is me. And I don't have control over how you feel about a conversation. I only have control over how I feel about a conversation. So if anything's going to get better, if anything's going to improve, there's only one place I can focus my attention, and that's on myself, right? I look beyond his weakness and I find areas where I can commend and encourage. I mean, that almost goes back to that compliment sandwich we've talked about, seems like months ago now. It probably was months ago. I care enough to admit when I'm wrong, even in my attitude. You know, I talked about apologizing to Michaela for being the oldest, but it's not, apologies also are not just, well, I apologized for that 5 years ago when I acted that way. Don't you remember? Or maybe if I'm engaging back in the old habits, I need to learn to apologize again and be consistent with the ability to admit I'm wrong. I actually had some of this conversation today in the State House about 3 hours ago. And we didn't turn to any passage, but we were talking about partisanship, really, and how it is harming discourse, and how it's becoming more and more common to find the circle of people that you agree with and associate just with those people. And therefore, when someone says, I don't know how it is that you see this policy this way. I don't understand how you view it this way without seeing the other side. And the person can then retort, everyone I know sees it this way. All my friends agree with me. Well, what's the problem there? You've only surrounded yourself with people that think like you do. And you shut everyone else out. And in the world of social media, that's easier to do than ever before. The circles of people, and anymore, it's very common for someone has a dissenting viewpoint and it's time to unfriend them or get them out of the circle or get them out of that communications group, whatever it is. And then you can sit back and you can honestly then say, well, all my friends see it my way because I've disassociated myself with everyone who disagrees with me. And to be able to admit I'm wrong and be able to operate in an area of recognizing my own bias. What is bias? If I say I have to recognize my own bias, what am I even talking about? What does that sound like?
I'm going to say predisposition to thinking a certain way, but that doesn't seem quite right.
That's pretty close. I like predisposition for thinking in a certain way and sticking to it, I think you said, Samantha. We get fixed in our viewpoints on things. And we think we've heard all the arguments. This is another temptation for an old legislator. Some of the things we debated, when something was coming up today, I said, that sounds like 2012 all over again. I don't remember now what the issue was even. I'm going, man, I know it was about 10 years ago. We worked that one over pretty good. And you feel like you've heard all the arguments. So what do? You know, I've got this figured out. I'm not going to be open-minded. And all these things are, again, about relationships and keeping in respect and honor and reverence the relationships that we have with one another. Why do I say reverence the relationships we have? And the key word I didn't say is fellowship. Why do we reverence the relationships that we have with one another? Because they're founded where? They're rooted in what? Or supposed to be.
Relationship with God.
I mean, if we don't have that commonality and we don't have the desire to please God first, then why should I ever agree with Chuck? Why should I ever go out of my way to respect his opinion? It's because he's created in God, his image, and he's a citizen in God's kingdom. And as a fellow heir, I should reverence that relationship. We've got some things in common. Our kids are about the same age. You know, we both stand erect and we go to work and we do this and that. We've got things in common. But our greatest commonality is our citizenship in God's kingdom. And from that springs all the other things that have me respecting and valuing the relationship I have with Chuck. There's a hand.
Reverence for our relationship with one another is important because the way our relationships look among one another is a picture of how we treat our relationship with Christ. Because, you know, Jesus would say, if you have those who are hungry or in need or sick or naked and you do nothing, then that was me who it's the same as though you had neglected the Son of God who needed those same things. And he doesn't say it in that list, but I think Jesus would have included, if you can't listen to your brother, if you can't get along with your brother, or if you can't have patience and respect for them as a person, well, how am I supposed to believe that you would have that same patience or respect for my words when I'm speaking to you, or for what I have to say as the Christ? I mean, God would say elsewhere in his word that if we despise our brother who we've seen, how can we love Christ who we've not seen?
I mean, to take that analogy or that point one step further, when Christ is speaking to us, doesn't he use each of us to communicate with one another as a means for him to speak to us? Why are we to admonish a brother? Why are we to, those who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of meekness? I mean, that's an action of God. God does the restoration. But he's using us to do it. We are his instruments. And so to Andrew's point about how we treat one another in terms of basic common decencies, we also know that God speaks to us through our brothers and sisters. And we do that in prayer and song. We do that in lots of ways. We do that in correction and humility. There's lots of ways that God is using us, or should be using us, as instruments for his communication. And so we better have respect for God's instruments and show the reverence for wanting that openness to exist to where we can have these kind of influences with one another. I just thought this is a great list. It's a practical list of things. There's nothing, it's not all inclusive. There's nothing that closes the discussion of any other ideas here. But just too good to pass up. I'm on the wrong page of my notes. Anyone want to add anything or make any other observations on these points? We do have contribution.
We had talked before about trust and transparency and things like that. And I know that for a long time, I believed that you either do trust somebody or you don't, or you are transparent or you're not. And now I'm more leaning toward it being on a spectrum and allowing for growth in both of those areas. And I heard someone say the other day that this is about hurt and harm. Of course, I love the Hippocratic Oath, but hurt is temporary. Harm is long-term. And even those would be specific to the individual. What may hurt you may not hurt me. So these things are kind of individual and on a spectrum type thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. I mean, we do have the moments in our public worship that are more of a communal communication and communal sharing of ideas and a communal sharing of admonitions and encouragements. But that is not the extent of our relationships with one another. It's just what goes on here in this place. And Joy's recognition that there's a spectrum and that there should be movement in those relationships, and there should be an effort put into closing the gap. Some of us are easier to reach than others, and some of us are just going to require more work to close the gap on the communication side so that you can have a fuller appreciation for how that person thinks, how they see things, how they feel about what goes on around. And all of those things are an investment that require effort. They don't just happen. Anything else? Discussion, questions, prompting additional insight. Has anyone been prompted that they'd like to share some insight they received? Anybody? Was no one prompted to additional insight? I'm shocked. Practical. Okay. What is your additional insight here?
I was hoping you were just going to take that.
Oh, well, practical is good. That's a good start.
Well, because it talks about going through John Wooden saying there's no INT, that it's all about working together to accomplish a mission. Their mission was to win basketball games, win basketball championships. So the last question is, what specific things can you think you can do to promote teamwork in the church?
Okay.
And I think that would be a great discussion question for us to dive into.
Like say on a evening where we sit down and just talk to one another for 45 minutes kind of a thing? Or right now? I'm not sure which one you mean. Either way, huh?
Right now would be good.
Right now
Or
would
we
be
could
good?
do it some other time. It's your class.
You got that right. So, team exercises would require first that we feel like we're part of a team. This isn't chess. Now, I suppose there are chess teams, but it's still sort of individual tournaments that, whatever. This isn't chess. So, do we feel like we're part of a team? Do we feel like we're working for the same thing as a team? Or are we all independent free agents without a coach that do our thing that we think gets us to the goal line rather than thinking of it in terms of there's ways that we can cooperate to maximize our success? How do we think about that? I want to start there. Because I think that can be, I'm not sure that's a settled question. I'm making this up as I go, Samantha. Do we feel like we're part of a team, or are we more all independently on a road to heaven or somewhere, and we feel like it's really our effort? Now, if people want to come along with us as we go, we're not going to oppose it, but are we working together as a team to enhance our success in achieving goals? Okay. You got to say it again now.
I said I feel like there's a lot of people on the team, but there's also a lot of people sitting on the bench. And what I mean by that is not participating.
Okay. What does that generally, in a general sense, do to those who are working hard on the field?
It's a lot of responsibility on those.
You may not have an equal distribution of effort, and you may overburden some or make them feel overburdened. I think all we can do is what we can do. But maybe the team would feel like we would have more success on the field if there were more active people who knew the play, right? It's kind of like if you watch Pee Wee football or something, you've got a lot of kids running around in every direction, but some of them don't seem to understand what the game is. And that's because they're Pee Wee football players, and maybe they do that in high school too. I never paid much attention to sports, as you know. But when you see that kind of activity, it can be a discouragement. As Samantha said, it just makes you work harder, which I think it can affect people that way too. But when you say that, Samantha, though, I would also say that probably makes someone feel a little more isolated and doing their own thing because they have to, because the team isn't working with them as effectively as it should. So they may be pushing harder, but they may not feel like they're pushing smarter, in terms of getting things done. Yes, sir.
Well, and it can lead to arrogance because you can feel like you're a really important part of the team, and if I don't do this, then it's not going to get done, kind of thing. I appreciate that Chuck had Susan repeat her comment with the microphone because I think the reality is we look at your question as a rhetorical question. Of course, we know the answer. The answer is we're all a team. But I think Susan's answer reflects not only honesty, but I think it's the honest truth is if more of us are honest with ourselves, it reflects the attitude we really have toward the church. That we do feel like, oh, well, of course we're a team, but more like what you said, we're a team of individuals, and there are a lot of people that are just riding the bench. We've got some important players that step out on the field, and they do some things and get recognized, and that's all good and great. But for the most part, there's not the kind of involvement that really needs to be there. So to Aaron's point, I think one of the things that we've done recently with those groups will encourage teamwork. And I do think it's helpful from that perspective that it involves a lot more people in things that are really of, I don't want to say more importance than what happens in our assembling together, because it's not more important. It's just, it's significant and important. And I think we have a tendency to get focused on the 4 hours we're together to the neglect of a whole lot of other things that could be done. And I think that these groups are going to lead not only to more activity and involvement outside of these 4 walls and these 4 hours, but I think it's going to lead to a lot more activity among people, the church as a whole. And so it will encourage teamwork. Is it the only way we can encourage that kind of teamwork? I don't think so. And I think Aaron, by bringing it up, recognizes there's a lot more ways we can encourage that too, and wants us to think about that. And I think it's a good exercise for us to consider, is what are some ways, and I mean, maybe it's one-on-one. Maybe it's a Paul and Timothy kind of thing, or trying to think a Ruth and Naomi kind of thing. I mean, don't want to leave out the women. I mean, we all have an opportunity to encourage somebody, and maybe we can get someone a little more involved than they have been in the past. And I don't mean involved in this from the sense that we need more song leaders and we need more people preaching and we need more Bible class teachers. I mean, not that we can't use those things, but that's not the focus. That's not what I'm talking about. And so I think Aaron's question's a good one for us to consider and think about. And I think Susan's comment's spot on.
So we have, let's just stay with the analogy for a while, because some of you folks think more sports oriented than I do. I'm going to try here. But we don't have coaches that also aren't wearing a jersey. They're all player coaches. And so as we talk about seeing those on the sidelines, and maybe you think, maybe the shepherds are the ones that are wearing jerseys too, and they're the ones that need to be pulling people off the sideline. And I've seen sports games. I don't watch that many. I've seen them where you'll have some player who'll make a great play, and they'll come in off the field or halftime or timeout or whatever, and they'll start scolding another player. You missed that tackle. I could have got another 5-10 yards if you'd made that tackle. And they'll really just come after him, and you thought, oh, wow, I thought they were really successful in what they did. But they saw an opportunity to work together that didn't happen, and they got after another teammate. And we don't have to yell at one another, but we can see those opportunities for involving more people. Aaron's got more thoughts now, I hope.
So the last part of the question says, what specific things can we do to promote teamwork? Which we've had some great generalities. People sitting on the bench, we're all part of a team. But what are some specific activities that we can do? And number one of them, and I was guilty of this for years, is when we walk in this building, we should know the name of every person in this building. And if we don't, we should have the humility to go up and reintroduce ourselves or get familiar with them. Because I have an organization of 35 people. And when I meet with them individually in different groups, because we have our sales team, our install team, our service team, and during team meetings, their office, they're all standing in their own little corners together. And we try to engage them. But when I'm sitting with my sales guys and we mention a technician by name, and one of my sales guys goes, I don't think I know who that is. I'm like, I got work to do, because we are a team and we have to know each other. So one specific is make sure you know everybody's names. Then a little bit deeper to that is, get to know each other by hobbies and activities and, things that we know people are excited about and into, because that all creates energy and working together, which promotes teamwork.
Sometimes you can find out there's people just as weird as you are. I've done that only recently. And I won't name any names because I just said it was weird. I know I'm weird and found out that, wow, there's someone else that kind of thinks that's cool. You know, I thought I was the only one. That's kind of neat when you do that. But what does knowing someone's hobbies and their interests actually do in the greater scheme of things? What does it actually mean? It shows your interest in a person. It just shows that you value them for who they are instead of trying to make them in your image. Don't talk. We all love, most of us all, love to talk about our interest. Let someone else have the conversation once in a while and find out what they enjoy, what they like to do. And it says that I care about you in a very practical way. These things aren't difficult. It's just remembering our relationships. If you got a chance to meet Jesus Christ, he's going to return to the earth just for a visit. He's just coming to say hi and see how things are going. Would you like to spend that whole evening talking about your interests and your hobbies? Would you like to hear what Jesus has to say? Would you maybe feel like it's time to keep your thoughts to yourself for a little while and let someone else dominate the conversation? Don't know. What else? I appreciate you bringing it up and all the contribution, all the ideas here. Practical. We want practical things that help us to build each other up and bear one another. Anything else? Or any other question? Andrew. Chuck, Andrew's got a thought. Because once I turn the page on lesson 10, I'm not going back anymore.
Just trying to think about other practical team building habits. I think one is to be careful that we're not leaving people's contributions behind or failing to see them. Because we talk about, well, it feels like we're on a team, but it feels like not everyone's contributing the same amount or not everyone's participating the same way. And I don't think it's wrong to look at that and see that, but we also need to be careful that we're not seeing participation only by the way we define what participation looks like. And someone could be doing something that we might be ignorant of or might just not have thought of that was a kind of contribution. An example I thought of is, if someone brought word to you that a sister needed help with some task, and you volunteer, I can do that. I've got some time to take care of that, and you go and do it. Ask yourself after the work is done, after the credit is given, the work is done, you finish the task. Do you think to credit the person who brought you that information, the person who was aware enough of their sister in Christ to say, hey, this person needs help? Sometimes awareness and perceptiveness is just as much a work and a contribution that's needed as someone who can swing a hammer or push a mower or do someone's taxes or whatever it is. So, don't fail to see the little contributions or the supportive contributions. And I would say a way to do that is we need to try to get into a habit of a mental exercise. When we do something or when we see something get done, ask ourselves, what are all the things that had to happen in order for this to be a success? What are all the pieces that had to fall into place in order for this work to get completed? Because if we do that and look at that, we'll pretty much see nearly all the time, unless we're dishonest with ourselves, I doubt we can ever say that it was all my doing from start to finish, 100%. I made this happen.
To Andrew's point, it kind of made me think a little bit more about this no I in team in terms of, again, we've had in our culture, in church culture, don't be doing your good works in order to be seen of men. But if no one is communicating what someone needs, then things just get overlooked. That is an admonition to not do your good works for the reward of being personally recipient of accolades for what you've done. Don't do it for the purpose of being praised. But it doesn't say you can't communicate needs in order to see that things get accomplished. A couple weeks ago, we had the spark of genius of let's just all send a card. And I think Aaron brought that up. And I said I was going to ask for a show of hands. Does anyone know that I did not ask for a show of hands? Did you notice that? How many cards did you get? How many cards did you get? They're in here. Did any of you get cards? Some people got some cards. Some people got lots of cards. Some people sent a lot of cards. A lot of cards. What about last week? That was 2 weeks ago. Did you send a card last week? I did. And I got 4 on my list to get done this week. It's a little thing, but Aaron talked about he's going to have some kind of drawer or something that he can keep at work and just pull out some cards and start writing cards. Do that right there in the office, take care of that, get them stamped out the outbox, and off they go. But I've heard back from those that have received cards I've sent. I've not heard from all of them, but I've heard from some of them who got a card from me. And I did see a face that I hadn't seen in a while, and they should have received a card from me. I don't know that they did or not, or that they were here and had not been for a while as a result of the card. I don't know. But over time, that's going to have a positive effect on people's feeling of connection and worth and value. And it's a little thing. It's not hard. And it's a practical application of what we're talking about, of showing how we want to bear one another. Send a card to someone that you're not that familiar with talking to. And say, I was just thinking of you. Maybe you can recall something that's in your understanding of that person, and some anniversary date or something they enjoy doing, and make reference to that in a note. So, I don't know, maybe I'll ask for a show of hands just randomly. Who sent their card without the assignment? See how that goes. We might try that. Anything else? Yes, ma'am. I got 2.
I think that one thing that can really help with teamwork is delegation. Because if I know that this person is good at this thing, but I'm still like, well, I want to help, so I go and do it, and I do a bad job at it when I know that this person could have done better, we need to be humble enough to be like, hey, you are a better team member for this. Not all of us are good at spiking the volleyball. Some of us need to be setters, and some of us need to be passers. And so we all need to be willing to know each other's strengths, which is a part of getting to know one another. And then once we know those strengths, be willing to give up the opportunity to serve by giving it to someone who can serve in a better capacity than us.
Okay. I like Emily's point. But you can do the delegation. You can also do the, I know you're good at this, come with me and we'll work on it together. Because now you're kind of killing 2 birds with one stone, aren't you? So there's multiple ways to address that. Yes. Go on.
I really like that analogy that Emily gave. It made me think well, my answer originally was time together, watching good movies or cooking, and then with saying cooking, and then what Emily said, it made me remember that there was an experienced lady in this congregation who took the time, who knows how to can, and took the time to teach an inexperienced person how to do that. That's a very cool thing.
It is. You can wrong, you can kill people too. So it's good to know what you're doing. So I've heard. I haven't killed anyone yet, but I don't do any canning either. My cooking's almost killed a few, but that's another subject. That's a good point. I mean, sharing the skills that we have that we might call domestic skills, or, you know, what you can learn working on a car, but it's the experience too. It's not just the skill. It's the person who says, I want to share with you something I think's helped me in my life, and I want you to have that same tool in your toolbox. And we get to do that together. I mean, these are just all simple, straightforward things. And we don't have to have a sign-up sheet to do these things. Not that there's anything wrong with a sign-up sheet on the board. But we don't have to wait for a sign-up sheet to reach out and build our connections so that we support one another all the more. Life gets tough sometimes, and we all need help. Andrew.
This is a bit of brainstorming, but I had this thought a week or so ago, and I've forgotten about it, so I got to put it out so that maybe collectively we don't forget about it. When it comes to knowing who's good at what and who has what skills, sometimes it's good to have a way to know who has those skills. I don't know how many times we find ourselves surprised. Oh, you know how to do this, or oh, you've experienced this. I didn't even know that. And it would be really great if we had sort of a library of experts, or a library of experienced people on various things. And I think that we have the tools within our directory system or the website to include some of that information, so that I don't know if it's searchable, but I'm sure there's a way that we can get more of a catalog of, I need help with this. Okay, who can I go to who might be able to help me with that? I think before we've kind of relied on organic figuring out what people know how to do and what people know how to help us with. And maybe if we had even a little bit more of a reference tool, this is something that I've seen in some organizations they try to implement, is have some kind of reference library for who can help you with different kinds of problems, so that you don't have to just guess at who to go to or who to talk to.
So I know we've got some of those capabilities, and I've also been telling myself for better than a year now, I'd like to learn how some of these interactive tools could help us in our communication and in our knowing one another. Now, again, just putting everything on a website is not the same as having the chance to get to know each other better. But it's funny because sometimes I'm asked, well, don't you know how to do that? And I'm like, well, I don't know how to do that. Well, can't you help me with that? I don't have a clue. I don't do that. But maybe someone else does that knows better. I remember I used to think, man, we used to have so many plumbers around here. We had, I don't know how many licensed plumbers at one time. We had electricians and plumbers and you name it. I was like, we could go into the construction business just as a church. We could build houses. We've got everything we need here. And some of us still have some of those skills, but maybe getting a little older. But the point is, you kind of knew who you could turn to for certain things, especially if they had a pickup truck that they drove that had their name and it said such and such plumbing on it. That was kind of a hint sometimes of what what their skills were. But it seems like maybe the shepherds need to think about, we've been trying to incorporate the idea of learn a little, do a little, learn a little, do a little. Maybe we need to do a little diving into what we can use on that platform that'll help us to connect and know each other better and know where to turn when we need help with certain things. But just how can we find ways to build up our appreciation for one another as family? Part of the problem from my end, I'll at least give this excuse, is I have zero social media presence. You will not find me on anything except LinkedIn, and that is dormant. I don't post a thing on there. But some of you are more accustomed to how these tools work and how you can share things. And we need as many people that have an internet connection or a address or whatever you need, some kind of user privilege, to be part of that so that we can be as inclusive as possible. So since Andrew said it's a mental note, I'm putting it in a mental note. I spoke it. It's not a mental note anymore. It's everyone's note. Now, help us think about how to achieve that. And if you're one of those folks that likes playing with the bleeps and the bloops and all that on the internet and can help with that, then you just step up and say, well, they can do it. They know what they're doing. Let me show you. No, we do it yourself. Let us know if you can help us with that. I did not get Lesson 11 started. I knew I was going to get started tonight, and I did not. So I am out of room. I cannot back up. Lesson 11, submit to one another. A lot of good material in this section. The first 2 pages are all, that's my keys, are all really a reading of Ephesians chapter 5. So our studies are going to focus in Ephesians 5 for probably a couple class periods as we examine that text together and pull out what we want from it. Okay?